So good to welcome you. It's so good. I really like the book. I've read a great deal, not all of it, but read it. And I certainly read that chapter on Cuba, my Lord. But welcome very much to Conversation Manhattan Network Public Access. And in the audience, welcome very much to Conversations. Pleasure to welcome to the program a young man who's written a very interesting book that we have displayed here on the stand and we'll be referencing. And the title of it is Great Negotiations, Agreements that changed the modern world, and it's a very interesting study of some of the major politically relevant negotiations that have taken place over in this last period of time, and very interesting read, very well written, and his name is Fredrik Stanton, and welcome, Fredrik, very much to Conversation.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Congratulations on the book. I read with hair-raising interest the thing about Cuba. We'll talk about that. But could you do me a favor, Fredrik? Where you were born and raised, we like to do it. We want to anchor it on your person, you as the person of you. So where you were born and raised, your education, and then we'll get that sort of anchoring on your person, and then talk about the book. But could you share your own background?
Of course, yeah. I was born right here in New York City. Went to high school in New Hampshire. And
where?
St. Paul's School, right
outside. Was
outside
that a prep school, like?
It is, yeah.
You're a preppy?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, okay. Good school?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful experience, great people, wonderful teachers, and I learned a lot, so it was fun.
Do you think it's different? You went to one of those, they had Philip Andover and these kind of schools.
Yeah, those are others, yeah.
Is the educational experience really significantly different at our prestigious, let's say that, prep schools, than, let's say, what the public schools are able to offer and so forth? Or have you given much thought to education, 12 to K?
I have. Of course, that was the only high school education that I know. So I don't know if I can speak to other experiences, but I really enjoyed it. I found it very enriching. I have no doubt that there are all sorts of other equally strong, qualified high school experiences, but this was mine, and I was very fortunate.
Wonder if we could back up a little bit into your family setting, because was the family setting one of professionals? Was there encouragement at the dinner table, things intellectual and so forth? Or what was the family setting, if you don't mind? I mean,
yeah,
dad,
absolutely.
mom, kids, sisters, brothers?
My parents are considerably older, and I think for me that was an advantage, because at the dinner table, I got to speak with them and with their friends when they came over as guests for dinner, and I think I was exposed to a conversation that was a little bit deeper and larger than maybe otherwise. I don't know. All I know is that I was exposed to a lot of ideas and thinking, and I'm very lucky and very happy. I've wonderful parents.
Were they professional people?
Yes.
Or were they concerned with the human condition and large issues and intellectually curious and all that?
Yes. My father's a professional. My mother, apparently raising me, was a full-time job.
You were a real challenge, huh? Well, she's done a good job, if I may say so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What profession was he, if I may?
He was a lawyer, at the time, and so yeah.
My daddy
legal profession.
Yeah, my daddy was a lawyer too. He used to talk about the law and Clarence Darrow for the defense and that kind of thing and everything. And then you went to St. Paul's. And is that when you do that? When we're in high school, it's been so long for myself. Are you specializing, or are you focusing, or is that still at the level of liberal arts mostly? If we're talking about that, they begin to get algebra in the 9th grade, you get geometry in the 10th as a sort of standard curriculum. I'm only asking, I've been reading a lot lately about the charter schools and the educational issues of how we're going to organize educational processes. It's an important question, but your remembrance of the way this curriculum and what happened at the was St. Paul's, you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was, I'd say it was fairly broad-based. I mean, we obviously had math and history and science and all the usual subjects. If you wanted to specialize, you were able to, obviously, especially at the higher grades. If you really had a passion for something, they would provide a way for you to pursue it. But I think at heart, any high school has to lay the foundation, and that's what most of the experience was about.
Did you have tutor? Was it tutorial like Britain or not?
No, St. Paul's is it's classroom format. One of the things that St. Paul's likes to do is they have a large oval table.
Yeah.
So all of the students sit around the table from each other and with the teacher. And in a sense, it's a little bit more of a conversational format.
I like that.
Yeah.
This is called conversation.
I thought you might.
Right,
yeah, I thought you might.
Yeah, right.
So, it was again, it was a very good experience for me. I was very fortunate. Wonderful teachers. You got to know the teachers very well, not just as teachers, but as individuals, and that was part of why the experience was so enriching.
You might even be having some tutorial kind of exchange over a cup of coffee or something.
Yes, there's a lot of interaction outside the classroom, I think, and that was very valuable because you could ask questions. It was more spontaneous, and it wasn't just classroom and then nothing. It was a continuous learning environment.
Well, thank you for that. I'm not sure because I was just through the public schools in Michigan and so forth, so it was a different thing. But it's a big issue. It's one I've been giving a lot of thought to lately about education, because there's more and more to learn all the time. And then there's the internet coming and so forth. But what about university? Then you went on to university.
I returned to New York to go to University at Columbia.
You did,
which I enjoyed.
And you did did you take your degree there or not?
I did. I did.
And you went through there. Then you did liberal again at the university level. Again, we could go to the same thing. You're taking liberal arts. Do they still have the liberal arts tradition where you don't jump right in specializing? I think pre-med people often go to science and biology right away in there. But how does it structure? How do you see it? Your experience there, and what was your experience in terms of how to deal with the multitudinous aspects of the human condition and the evolution of cosmos and so forth that is reality? Sure.
Well, Columbia prides itself on a core curriculum.
Core curriculum, okay.
So,
you have Bollinger is the president there?
He wasn't when I was there. He may be the president now.
He came
I
in
haven't
from
kept
Michigan.
Current.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. He did.
That's right. Yeah.
I know he was a president.
Yeah.
He may still be.
He came in from Ann Arbor. That was my family school. We were all done at Ann Arbor.
Good.
My mother and grandmother and father.
It's a great school. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Anyway, Mr. Bollinger's president. Yeah.
Yeah. So
but talk about the core curriculum.
The core curriculum. The idea behind the core is, as you said, that. It's important for college students to have a grounding in a number of different disciplines. So instead of arriving at college and immediately specializing, every undergraduate at Columbia College, of course Columbia University has other colleges as well, but Columbia College has to take art humanities, which is an art history course. We had to take a music course. We had to take a literature course, and we had to take was essentially a philosophy course, and then we had to take a language.
You need to do a language. You have to pass a competency test in foreign language, or
I think
like at the PhD level, you need to do that.
Yeah, I think we had to do a year of language.
Okay.
I think it was a year minimum of language, and then we also had to take a science course, although we could pick what sort of course it was. So
mathematics, you would have to.
My understanding, maybe it was math or science. I don't think we had to take a math course, but I think that was folded into the science rubric. So in a sense, we were forced to learn about fields that we wouldn't have otherwise been drawn towards, and I think that was a good experience.
You think the core curriculum idea is a good one? And
I enjoyed it.
Focus on things that are essential for a civilized person to be aware of.
I enjoyed it. I think, as you said, it draws from the idea of sort of the college experience is preparing one for life, additionally to preparing one for skills. You know, the classic liberal arts education, the idea that someone who comes out of college needs to be able to speak to a number of different subjects that speak to the human condition. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And then that takes, I'd say, more or less maybe a year or two of the time. Yeah. So when you get out of the sophomore year,
you can start specializing.
Exactly. Then you're able to choose a major and to specialize and to start going down whatever path you choose. And your major was? I did a concentration in political science. Specialization in international relations.
International relations. It seems to me the book is very apropos.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Anyway, so you did that, and then you studied with people, and you were interested in that, and then I think I saw in the bio you were also editor of the Spectator. Is that the name of the college?
Publisher. Yes. publisher. The Columbia Daily Spectator is it's the student.
A lot of circulation, yeah.
It does. It's the student newspaper at Columbia. It's a very old, very prestigious student paper. It has a large circulation, both because of the Columbia University and because Columbia is in New York, and so a lot of the local neighborhood reads it and uses it for news. It was a wonderful experience. It was a real privilege. It's student run. The editors put a great deal of time into it. My job as publisher was to see that they had the resources they needed to do their jobs.
So you weren't really doing journalism so much as it was like a business practice, or something?
I was
skills that are honed.
Yeah, my responsibility was the running of the business side of things. I had ex officio a seat on the managing board, and I'd be invited to the managing board meetings, which were wonderful experiences for me. But the real credit belongs with the editors, the editor-in-chief, the managing editor.
But you didn't try to fold the political into like journalism or something. Pulitzer is associated with Columbia University.
Yes,
I think.
That's right. It's awarded by the Columbia Journalism School.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a great school.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
They have the review also.
Yes, that's right. The Columbia Journalism Review. That's right.
So you got a degree in political science, right? Is what? Did you have a career path thinking? Were you thinking of going for a master's? Were you thinking of doing things academic, or what were you thinking of in terms of your life's path outside of or advanced after graduation?
Well, I think I chose political science and international relations because it fascinated me, and I had a passion for it.
Good idea. The good reason to do it.
I think it wasn't part of some larger calculus. It was more that I thought I'd enjoy learning more about it. So it didn't plug into sort of a career track or
you weren't
career
thinking
path.
that way.
Not really. Maybe I should.
Are you beginning to think that way now? Or,
well, in a sense, the two lines have converged back again.
Yeah.
And my passion has become something that I'm doing. So,
writing this book.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep exploring different interesting subjects about life and humanity and foreign policy.
Very good. I'm sorry to go down all these lines. You're too damned interesting, Mr. Stanton. That's the problem, you see. But anyway, you've written a really interesting book, and we'll get to the book, and it's called Great Negotiations. When did you get the idea for it? And maybe you could, in a certain thumbnail kind of way, spell it out for the audience what it's about.
I'd be happy to. I got the idea for the book a couple of years ago. I was watching television, and there was a show about the Italian Renaissance. And there were two major rival families.
Medici?
The Medicis and the Pazzis.
Okay.
And one day in church on Sunday, the Pazzis tried to wipe out the Medicis.
Really? Physically?
Yeah, there were two brothers, and they killed one of them.
Wow.
And they stabbed the other, but he got away. And as a result of this attack, he lost access to all of his money and resources. And
his patrimony.
Exactly, yeah. He was on the run. And he chose a very unorthodox response, a very unconventional approach. He said, look, let me just go to these people and see if I can't talk to them, if we can't sort it out. These were people who had just killed his brother and very badly wanted him dead.
Wow.
And he did. And he traveled to Rome to meet with the Pazzis. And no one knows what was said, but it worked.
He negotiated.
He negotiated his way out. He arranged some compromise, some solution.
Made him an offer they couldn't refuse.
Well, I don't know that it was lost to history. But I would be fascinating to know what it was. But and because of that, of course, we have the Italian Renaissance. So that
was certainly part of it. I associated with Medici being a major family in Florence.
So I just thought. You know, the facts aside, I just thought, what a fascinating moment in history. And there must be other examples of people pulling a rabbit out of a hat like that.
Or negotiating rather than resorting to arms, maybe.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that sort of started my thinking and talking to friends and doing research, and that sort of led me down the nose to proposal and eventually a book contract and the book.
And you're talking, the sub-paragraph is to the modern world.
Yes.
So you have laid out, you begin with Franklin, I think, at Versailles.
Yes.
And all of that. And the diplomatic skill of negotiation over major issues, and you've got what, 7 or 8?
8, yeah.
8 instances that you highlight and put out in detail, right?
Yeah, there were a number of older negotiations that I looked at that I thought would be very interesting and were very powerful and have a great effect. But it's very hard to recreate what was said.
Yeah.
I needed negotiations where I could convey the give and take of the people in the room and what happened, and take the reader and put them at the table and give them a sense of what was going on.
Right.
And the drafting the Magna Carta, for instance, I thought would have been a wonderful example of a powerful revolutionary moment of people discussing. But no one really knows what was said.
Right.
There was another...
The mists of history, really.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. There was
you ever
another...
try to read Beowulf?
I have, yeah.
Could you figure it out? I mean, it was Old English. I could hardly understand what the hell was being said.
I read it in high school.
Oh,
so.
yeah. I think I did too, sir. I think I did too, sir. Yes, yeah. But anyway,
and another older negotiation that I looked at was there was a remarkable moment where Attila the Hun had defeated all of Italy's armies, was poised at the top of Italy to come down and wipe out Rome, essentially.
Right.
And the Pope went and said, again, let me just go talk to Attila, see if we can't sort things out. And he brought a very small entourage, met with Attila the Hun. Again, no one knows what was said.
Right.
Attila
I would
picked
love to
up,
have been a fly on the wall.
Oh, it would be incredible. Yeah.
I wish we had a video from that.
I know.
I know. Go ahead.
But Attila picked up his troops, essentially, went back east and never came back. And so I guess my point is there are a number of other, negotiation has been a driving force behind history for a very long time. But the more recent negotiations gave me more to work with.
Okay, yeah, well, you got more source.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so that was one of the reasons why, agreements that changed the modern world.
I wonder if we could talk about negotiation in the abstract a little bit from your studies and everything. Because you do have a lot of different power relationships between people, and they're in different positions. One political group is trying to become more powerful, and a lot of that's been done by, let's say, military conquest. If there's military conquest, then it's not really negotiation. They're laying down the terms that the other will have to accept under force of arms. And I think the idea of conquest is something that is thought of as negative terms in the popular consciousness, but I think it has to be part of a recognition of the structure of international law. That conquest is a legitimate stance for a person to take in terms of a negotiating process with the conquestees. Well, do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so.
Imbalance of power between various forces that are negotiating.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the book is that history is traditionally looked at through the lens either of war or biography.
Right.
And this fills in a missing piece of the puzzle.
Good. Okay.
That war, of course, is a major event when it happens, but there are other ways that nations adjust their differences that are equally important and have equally important legacies, and are equally dramatic in many ways. One of the examples in the book, the Congress of Vienna, was an early attempt to step away from what you describe, where essentially the victors after the Napoleonic War gathered. And they said, well, how do we reorganize Europe? Because it's been turned upside down. And one of the things that came out of the negotiation was that if it simply was victors dividing the spoils, if it was simply a power arrangement,
there's been a lot of that.
Well, it wouldn't be durable. That the next, if there's a shift in the power arrangement, if one country becomes stronger again, then you have to fight another war.
Does that become a place where they're trying to establish their historical legitimacy? Do you understand what I'm saying? Rather than just conquest. But
exactly.
Conquest, and inordinate power relationships between various people, the Gatling gun had a big advantage
Absolutely.
over the musket.
Yes.
And so they would have an advantage. And that's
Yes.
something that we should realize, that it's not always even Steven in
That's
terms
right.
of what's going on.
And
That's all I'm
it's a
saying.
dynamic process.
Realpolitik. is what I'm
Yes.
saying, yeah.
Well, and it's a dynamic process,
Yes.
and technology obviously is an element. What was significant about the Congress of Vienna was, as you said, an attempt to add the element of legitimacy to the power arrangement. And I
Okay.
think they felt that if you had a stable power arrangement, it would be even more stable if you had a claim to a higher authority of legitimacy.
Where are they going to get the higher authority unless they go to something spiritual? Some people try to do that in the name of a religious call from God or something.
Yeah, that's one type of
a religion or something.
That's one type of
higher
legitimacy.
being part of a larger empire or something.
Well, that's closer to it. I think what they tried to do was, first of all, claim to what is right rather than might, and the second is of an appeal to a higher international order. The idea of it's the best thing for Europe and it's the best thing for all of us.
Right.
Because if all of us just get in constant warfare, it's going to hurt everybody.
I suppose Rome, the emperors of, would be putting that sort of a thing to Dacia or wherever. You know what I'm saying?
This was after the Roman Empire had.
Yeah, no, I know you're talking Vienna. No, I'm talking historically.
Oh well,
that,
I think
they were with the Roman Empire, or the Carthaginians felt the same, and that kind of thing.
I mean, you had the Pax Romana, where it was stable because it was monopolistic.
Or Britain had an empire; they had a Raj in India,
similarly,
and it was like a thing that gave a great ability to assert a higher authority, their empire.
Right, the Pax Britannia. This was different because it was a multi-party.
You're talking Vienna now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get you.
But that's okay. No. This is
yeah.
fine. So the trick is, how do you get a number of very important great powers, each of whom inherently wants larger territory and more people and more power, to create a stable system? And you were one of the things that was interesting is, as you know, Buckminster Fuller.
Oh, lovely.
Has this system of dynamic stasis, where you have torsion. Where you have
tensegrity.
Tensegrity. That's
right.
Thank
That's
you.
a big concept.
Where you have equal opposition of tension
and compression. That's all there exists in the universe. Perhaps that's something that's really going to be understood more importantly by intellectuals, I think.
Well, that's
one could be considered east-west or male-female. You could consider the two that way. Compression being like a geodesic dome, and then there's the tension that goes through it. And those two things could be put out male, female, east, west, or anything, because it's molecular and it seems to be the way the universe is ordered.
Well, if you look at some of Buckminster Fuller's structures,
I've looked at a lot.
I realize
He's my hero.
Well, it's I think they're analogs conceptually to what they did at the Congress of Vienna.
Okay, thank you.
Because the idea is each country wants to expand its borders.
Okay.
But there's an interlocking network of alliances that prevents any one unit from getting out of hand.
Right, okay.
So you have a balance between expansion and containment.
Okay.
And you have, if any one country tries to expand, the others will step in and say, no, that's not good for any of us.
Right.
So you have this very strange, but in a sense beautiful structure that has a balance of power, and of course it's called a balance of forces.
Of power, yeah.
And I thought of Buckminster Fuller.
Did you really?
While reading it, I actually looked for photos to put in the book of some of his structures to explain
I got
visually.
Some. I'll try to get to you for your next book, because I'm all for supporting Bucky Fuller. He's the best polymath I think we've ever had.
Well, he's a very interesting guy. But that was, I think, the power structure that they tried to build at Vienna. They also realized that in itself wasn't enough.
Okay.
That it was necessary but not sufficient, that they also had to have the glue of legitimacy, and that it needn't simply reflect the power balance at the time, but they had to say,
not to discount the power balance.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You had to have both. You had to have both.
You had to be realistic.
You had to have. You couldn't simply have legitimacy without a power balance, because that wouldn't get you anywhere either.
Or if you have a power balance without legitimacy, you got long-term problems in terms of maintaining it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And so one of the innovations at the Congress of Vienna was to put the two together, and it was, of course, a very messy, interesting, it was actually a fascinating negotiation.
Yes.
But what came out of it was a structure in Europe that prevented a major war for essentially a century, which was the first time that Europe had a major peace since the Roman era, if not before, for 1,000 years.
War and all kinds of, right.
So it was just a very interesting moment in the development of international affairs. It was also a fascinating period. They had hundreds of thousands of people came to Vienna. They partied every night until all hours in the morning.
Partied hardy?
They partied hardy. I mean, they partied in a way that would put Hollywood or Vegas to shame.
Hollywood does pretty good. I mean, when they push the envelope there.
Well, they would have given Hollywood a run for their money.
Or something.
They had a masquerade ball one night for 10,000 people, and at midnight everyone took their masks off, and it was a big party. They had a big dinner where 3,000 silver spoons were stolen.
Wow!
Because people would just, and every night they had one of the parties was a sledding party. They had a huge sledding party with hundreds of sleds. At the very end was this huge sled which carried the orchestra. And so they went out of their way for the most ostentatious entertainment, because it was the first time that all these heads of state had come to the one place.
You're looking at a dynastic order then, in large measure, or out of the dynastic period?
It was a turning point in a sense.
You're right. It was the nation state was blooming.
Yeah, it was. Napoleon had introduced a new concept.
Right. Or America, for that matter.
Well, America had, but in Europe specifically, I think Europe.
I think the Americans had taught us bumpkins across the ocean.
Well, America wasn't really a party to the Napoleonic Wars.
No, I wasn't thinking. I was thinking more sociologically.
Conceptually, well, we were of course up and running, and during.
I think we informed the French Revolution. And it was the Scottish Enlightenment, Hume and that really got the thing going, and Adam Smith and the steam engine industrialization was coming and all that,
But the monarchs at Vienna were definitely still traditional dynastic
and
monarchs.
that had held sway for about 1,000 years after Rome.
Yes.
I mean, that was legitimacy.
Yes.
Was the earls and the barons, the robber barons, and other, but the barons were rather low on the totem pole. It was the dukes and the earls, and then the king themselves.
And just to return to the
sorry,
parties.
I didn't mean to
No,
get
that's
you
okay.
off
This is all interesting. About halfway through the Congress of Vienna, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, actually the Austrian Empire, had to impose a 50% income tax.
Wow.
Just to pay for the parties.
The parties.
At the negotiation.
Party tax.
Yeah.
For us.
Yeah.
On you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. That sounds. So, I think the aristos have been doing that for a long time out of a lot of human history.
They did it.
I think the
time
pharaohs
then.
Probably pulled some of that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Nebuchadnezzar. But anyway, you've got that. That's very good. And then also you come right into the modern period too. Like you begin with Mr. Franklin at Versailles and how important it was to get support from the French for our war. We almost lost that thing.
It was a very close run.
It was a close call and everything, and a big thing. And then others. How did you decide upon the 8 that you did? And maybe we could take them off. What are the things you did?
Sure. It's a good question. The premise behind the book, of course, is there are any number of important negotiations that have changed the world.
Yeah, negotiation goes on all the time.
It does. The 8 that I chose had certain characteristics in common. All of them were major negotiations that left a significant footprint and still affect our lives today.
Okay, that's
so
good.
they had to have some
Certainly
lasting.
The American Revolution you start off
absolutely,
with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another thing was the negotiators at the table had to have the power to affect the outcome.
Okay, right.
It couldn't simply be a dictation of terms. It couldn't simply be a natural.
Okay. Oh, there had to be
there had to be agency. It couldn't simply be a natural rolling of
like
of
might
a natural
might over the less mighty.
Right.
Which has been a lot of.
Right. Or simply unfolding of a larger strategic. It had to be something where the people at the table could determine which way the outcome went.
Yeah, and so they both had to have interests that might have.
Exactly.
They'd have to find a meeting of the mind.
Exactly.
And that's something that we want among our diplomats.
Yes.
And our diplomatic members of our society globally.
Yes. Yeah. And the other filter, as it were, was, of course, there had to be enough of a record that I could piece together what was said and what the exchanges were. So those were the primary
So
filters.
let's tick them off, though, can we?
Sure. It starts with Benjamin Franklin at the height of the American Revolution, going to France to secure their support for the revolution.
Pulled it off. He was very popular.
Yes, it was very important to the revolution. It was a moment where things really could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And we needed material. We needed gunpowder. We needed weapons. We needed financial support. And France was really the one nation that could do it for us.
That was crucial too. Yeah.
And Franklin pulled it off through a very unconventional way.
Yeah, he was he was very sophisticated.
He was. He could
very
shrewd.
relate to their way of thinking.
Yes.
I think John Adams had a little harder time. He was there in terms of being able to relate to the French of Versailles.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Franklin, he loved the French culture.
Yeah.
And he really enjoyed being in Paris, and he made the most of it. And I think France responded, and there was a tremendous popularity for Franklin. They sold emblems of his portrait everywhere, and he was a real celebrity.
Yeah.
And he would write these letters home saying, I can't walk in the streets without people coming up and recognize me. And he was a genuine hero.
Yeah, and that's an important characteristic of a leader who's going to be diplomatically representing a political entity.
It was very helpful
with others. Yeah.
It was very helpful,
and it's very important. Yeah. You have faith. Do you have a good high regard for our foreign service by and large as an entity?
Oh, by and large.
I do
of course.
Too.
I think they're
I think it's a very good group.
They're
the professionals,
very
not necessarily the leaders, but the professional class
I think they're out there doing a very hard job every day, and they're doing the best they can, and they're very dedicated and professional. Absolutely.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, you got one of the problems is we're in television, young man, and television moves so fast.
Okay.
And you have 8, and we got to get through it.
All right.
And I certainly want to get to Cuba.
Of course. Well, we can go through, and then we can return to the highlights.
You had the Louisiana Purchase.
Louisiana Purchase was the next
thing.
one. Yeah. It changed entirely the nature of the United States. It was a phenomenal experience for the country and for the people involved. We went in there just asking for the port of New Orleans, and we came out with a half a continent.
Staggering. Made us a really huge, it just changed everything.
It did.
Yeah. It was the best real estate deal in the history of this universe.
I believe that's true.
Yeah, right. What did they pay? They paid something like a few $1 million.
It was and they got an entire, essentially a half a continent.
Yeah. Which gave us very easy manifest destinies to the Pacific.
It started the push west.
Yeah.
It started that
and
entire
south.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And Napoleon knew it at the time when he sold it to us. He said, whatever nation holds the valley of the Mississippi will one day be the greatest nation the world has ever seen. And he was, of course, right.
Yeah, we're the greatest nation the world has ever seen, I think, don't you?
I think that's right. Absolutely,
I think we
without
do
question.
now. Yeah, we're like, we have a global reach. We're influencing things, and our model is one that's being modeled by much of the world political leadership now, I think, don't you? In the name of what is called legitimate. Whether there's something new needed beyond the model we give with Keynes and everything is another issue. But I think that for good or ill, we have 130 big bases around the world, military bases.
There's no
That's
question.
like empire. We're an empire.
Well, there's no question the U.S. is a global power and has been for a while and will continue to be for a while.
Right, it would seem that way, yeah. But we're getting ahead of the game.
It's okay. And then, so after Louisiana Purchase, and we can return to these.
But remember, we only have an hour.
Okay, okay.
We could talk for 20 hours easy. We need a glass of brandy or something.
Well, that's why people need to read the book.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, okay.
The Congress of Vienna, which was a gathering of the heads of Europe after the Napoleonic Wars to figure out how to redraw the borders and establish a new order out of the ruins, which they did, and which brought peace to Europe for essentially for 100 years. Then Teddy Roosevelt at the Treaty of Portsmouth.
Okay, I'm not that familiar with it, but go ahead.
Well, it's a lesser known but very important and fascinating moment in history where Teddy Roosevelt, who was this incredibly charismatic, larger-than-life personality, brought together Russia and Japan.
Oh, and there were millions had been killed.
There were. It was a terrible.
20 million? Did I read in your book?
Well, it was a terrible, terrible war. It was really. It almost became the First World War. It was the first. It was one of the first.
1905?
Yes, that's right.
It
was one of the first mechanized wars. It was with the machine gun had just come out, and in many ways it was a prelude to World War I in terms of the military casualty figures. But it was a terrible war. It bled Russia dry. It bled Japan dry, and threatened to throw both of them into revolution and famine and upheaval, and cause further bloodshed and drag in other parties and potentially become a global crisis.
And Teddy Roosevelt had a hand.
And he stepped in, and both of the parties trusted him. The U.S. was seen as a fairly disinterested third party, and he became the first American ever to win a Nobel Prize. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for that.
I didn't know they had it back then.
It had just been, I think it was 1900, but it had just a couple of years before.
I think it's worth, as one who thinks that economic theory informs the political process mightily, should make a distinction between the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, and the Nobel Prize, and the Nobel Prize in Economics.
Yes.
Nobel Prize didn't come until 1969, and it's sponsored by the Bank of Sweden.
That's right.
So it's a different thing.
That's right.
When you look at the economics.
I
just want to mention it because I really think economics theory is really important in terms of the political process.
It is.
A sidebar, sorry.
It
Too many sidebars.
Well, that's okay. I mean,
we could have a whole room full of sidebars.
Well, economics was very important to the peacemaking at Portsmouth, and one of the fears of both the Russians and the Japanese is their finances would be cut off from the international debt market. And it's one of the things that actually drove them to make peace.
We've got problems along those lines right now in Greece and other places.
Greece has a lot of financial problems right now.
But I don't want to get into the contemporary. We got a lot of problems with the historical
That's
thing.
right. Well,
and we got to move through the 8, young
Okay,
man.
so then the Treaty of Versailles, which was at the end of World War I, sowed the seeds of war for both World War II and in the Middle East.
And in the Middle East, because of the Balfour and stuff? Or,
it redrew the boundaries in the Middle East in a way that...
Sykes-Picot.
Sykes-Picot was a wartime agreement during World War I
set those boundaries,
that eventually became reflected in the boundaries.
And the Balfour Declaration was
the Balfour Declaration was...
That's getting to the Middle East from Europe.
But was a declaration by the British foreign minister about their policy in Palestine.
And they had this great empire, don't forget.
They did. But so Treaty of Versailles is a classic disaster of negotiation, and it shows what can go wrong if things aren't done right.
Also, there was a vengeance in terms of the things that were delivered down on some of the Germanic peoples.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons.
And that had consequences in the Second World War, I do believe.
That's right. That's one of the reasons it's blamed by many people for causing World War II.
Yeah, wars get more and more intense and more anger. Beyond anger, it becomes just gut-wrenching hate when you get war. You have to get people ginned up to do something. And then that's hard to contain when the thing comes to an end, that you want to, as you were instilled, the young men are instilled to kill, against perhaps their nature. And so that continues with some of the diplomats being very vengeful for the terrible things that were delivered down on their boys in the war.
Yeah,
or even their people. Increasingly, it's the people, the citizens. I think in the 19th century and 20th century change, there had been one, up until that period, it had been one civilian for every young man in the meadow shooting each other. Then by the time of the 20th century, there's 9 civilian deaths for every military death.
Yeah.
That's a big
World War I,
transformation.
yeah.
It's becoming firebombing and things like that.
Yeah, World War I,
Horrible.
there was a huge thirst for vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
It exacted such a human toll that was one of the things that
we had the
came
same
through.
problem in Lincoln. I mean, or at the end of our Civil War, there was tremendous. Well, that's inherent, I think.
I think,
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Then in 1949, there was a negotiation between Israel and its neighbors, primarily Egypt.
After 48,
After
the UN
48.
just born.
Exactly, and it was a very important moment for the UN. It was obviously a very important moment for Israel and the Middle East. And it was, the negotiation was mediated by a very striking...
Bernadette?
Bernadette
was assassinated.
He was assassinated, that's right. He was the original mediator. He was assassinated, and his deputy, Ralph Bunche.
Ralph Bunche, yeah, he got the Nobel Prize.
Took over and stood up in his place.
He got the Nobel, didn't he?
He got the Nobel Prize for this negotiation.
Yeah, right.
And it was a wonderful experience in terms of human dynamics.
Right, and also testing and putting something behind the new institution, the United
UN,
Nations,
that's right.
and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
That's right, because it was the UN's first great test in terms of war and peace, and whether it could bring these parties together.
And it lingers.
And it lingers.
And
among other things, I see it as an emblem of hope, because it was the first time that the parties came together and made an agreement that lasted for a period in the Middle East. And one of the things
it's still the most dangerous area in the world, do you think?
It's certainly one of them.
Where else is so dangerous? Maybe Pakistan, India?
Yeah, Pakistan, India is
that's a
very
real
dangerous
thing. But probably the hottest thing is because we now have an order that's following upon the American model more or less in terms of the way they're going to organize things politically and economically and so forth. And then you've got Islam. There used to be communists were the problem for the people of the so-called legitimate order. And then that seems not to be a problem now, but it seems to be Islam now. So there's a conflict with Islam, particularly some of the radical elements like Osama bin Laden, but they're also intellectual things, and they're questioning the legitimacy, perhaps, of the basic principles by which the world is organized and thought to be legitimate, calling for a new change that is we just had a bomb try to go off in Times Square.
Yeah, that's right, we did.
Ago. So it's still continuing. And the thing with the Israeli and the Palestinian and the Arab and the Islamic world is still a major thing that's roiling the world, is it not?
It is. And, communism was a big issue in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is the next...
Let's get to that. I read that story, and I remembered it. You were too young to remember it. I remembered, and it was just something amazing. And I read that story and got it. It was so well... lay it out for the people who may not remember, but I think most will.
It was a very,
very
intense,
harrowing,
frightening moment. It's probably the closest that the world has come to destroying itself.
Now, say that for a sec. Say that again.
Yeah, I think it's probably the closest that the world has come to destroying itself.
When you say the world, you say the world of Homo sapiens or human beings.
Well, I mean, I'm not a scientist,
the world,
but
there is
life
a world
on
beyond,
Earth was in jeopardy.
Do you think life? I don't think we have the ability to destroy life. But we did not have, if I may, I just want to make a point quick.
Yeah.
That something existential new maybe is going on as you come into this world and in your maturity and so forth. But that as recent as the Second World War, we did not have the ability or weapon systems that apparently we do have since about 1970, that if they're unleashed, as they have been in wars and spasms of hatred, all ginned up by patriotism and the rest of it, that apparently if they were unleashed, it would mean the end of our species.
Yeah,
Do you think that was the case? And was that the case? Most of the models say it was about 1970 we got to that point. And I noted that there was a disparity in the Cuban thing between Russia and the United States with atomic power, 17-1.
Yeah, there's a
and then we got to be about equity by about 1971.
Yeah, that sounds
And
right.
most of the modeling says we got species lethal with our weapon systems around 1970, about the same time Buckminster Fuller said, if you measure things ontologically or in terms of capability, we were transcending material scarcity, the ability to provide for everyone of the population of the world and the ecology about the year 1970. That was a major era when public access got started, the system that created this program.
Excellent.
All right, that's just a sum. But you sum it up.
Well, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev, who was the head of the Soviet Union, wanted to change the balance of power and he snuck about 164 nuclear missiles. Nuclear warheads.
Say that again. 160.
I believe it was 160-something nuclear warheads into Cuba.
By stealth.
By stealth.
By stealth. Used practically the entire force of the naval force that the Soviets had.
That's right.
Coming out of the Second World War.
Yep.
20 million lost. That kind of thing.
Yep.
Communism was the great boogeyman. That was the enemy du jour of the Western model that we were trying to represent. We were the great power. Okay, that's the kind. 100 and some, and then intermediate missiles.
Yes,
and it was all smuggled in without our knowing.
Yes, that's right. Both medium range and intermediate range missiles, which could have targeted almost the entire U.S.
Right.
And was discovered at the last moment by U.S. intelligence.
A U-2 fighter.
Yeah,
they did it almost by accident. How can it be that they could do something like that? I was curious as I read the words.
Yeah.
How could it be that they could do something like that we would not be aware of it?
Well, I think Cuba's a big country, and the missiles are comparatively small. Obviously, the Soviets thought they would get away with it, and they came very close to doing that. They underestimated the ability of U.S. intelligence and U.S. photographic intelligence capability.
Wait a minute. They did it. They must have taken the months to do that.
It did.
From the time when the decision was made. Mr. Khrushchev decided we're going to change the balance of power.
Yeah.
You had a communist country in Cuba, a compliant state in Mr. Castro and so forth, and he's going to bring all of that. The entire sea lift power of the Russian nation was dedicated to stealthily bring 50,000 troops.
Yeah, that's
something
right.
like 50,000 ground troops were brought into Cuba, and we did not notice it until a few days before the damn missiles were going to go live.
Yep.
How could we not have known that? I mean, what the hell kind of intelligence system did we have that they could have done? That would have taken months and months and months, like a D-Day. They knew D-Day was coming on the coast of Germany or on the coast of Europe.
It was simultaneously a great intelligence success to find it. It was also a great intelligence failure not to find it sooner.
That's playing with the unleashing of weapon systems we came within a hairbreadth of doing, which would have maybe. There would have been a few survivors somewhere.
Maybe. I mean, it
would have been the end of civilization.
It
would have been the end of, and we came within a hair's breadth of that happening in the same old way of where we can't back down to like a poker game.
Yeah, it was. As I say, these stories are some of the highest stakes poker games in history.
Well, that one is probably the highest stake ever.
Yes, I think that's right.
Well, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get.
That's okay.
You get the book just for that. I mean, if I may.
One of the satisfying things about the negotiation after that, which was Reagan and Gorbachev meeting in Iceland, is that not only did they come within a hair's breadth of eliminating all nuclear weapons, but they did successfully, eventually, one of the things that came out of it was START came out of that down the road, but along the framework that they laid down that weekend. But they also eliminated those missiles that were such a threat in the Cuban Missile Crisis. They eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons.
Intermediate range?
Yes, exactly.
Those are the ones that were the threat?
Yes.
Are those the ones that Reagan put into Europe in '82?
Were those the Pershing IIs?
Yeah,
were the ones
those are intermediate.
And he raised the stakes to such a degree.
It was in '82.
That sounds right. That sounds right. Yeah.
We had 1 million people in Central Park for the first. I mean, more people than any other time. Even Simon and Garfunkel couldn't get that many, or Linda Ronstadt or something. Yeah. And 1 million people when he did that put the missiles into Europe.
Yep.
And Jonathan Shell wrote The Fate of the Earth, writing about the lethality at a species lethal of the weapon systems. Do you think that's all over? Everything's okay because we just made a treaty with Russia? Or do you think there are other new weapon systems? You have inside sources to what's going on at Langley and other hidden research centers where we have things, nerve gas and other things we're creating. Because the leading element of research in the scientific community is to gain a political advantage by having a new weapon system, is it not? Throughout history? Is it still going on perhaps in the area of biological warfare or other things that give you an advantage over the others so you can laud them and have power imbalance at the negotiating table so you can get what you want?
Well,
that thing's still motivating the whole political world, it seems.
Yeah, I have no inside sources, but
I thought you should with all your sources. Now you should.
I have no
get smart.
Most of the sources for this book are in the Library of Congress and the New York Public Library.
I was just kidding in a way, but that situation in '62 was just too much.
And history continues to march on. I mean, there are plenty of weapons still out there. There are plenty of nuclear weapons. There are plenty of biological and chemical weapons, and of course there is the continued search for other types of weapons as well. So history continues to unfold.
That's been, even Da Vinci was doing weapons for the Medici.
That's right.
Get weapons to get advantage so that you can lord it over the other, and it's realpolitik.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's still operative.
Yeah, it's
still, you know.
And we see that today in places like Iran and North Korea, where the desire to obtain a nuclear weapon remains a very powerful driver for authoritarian regimes.
Well, for authoritarian regimes, it's also a driver that nobody will be able to challenge us. That is the United States. I don't think the weapons could be possibly species lethal unless those that are possessed by the United States were unleashed. Something that would be so horrendous. And they were close. I read your thing. They were close.
They were.
They went to DEFCON 2.
Yes.
They had them all on alert.
Yes.
They had the hair trigger. They had 150,000 troops ready for an invasion of Cuba, which would have set it off for sure.
That's right.
And they were going like that. If it hadn't been for, if I read it right, I think there was somebody else involved. If Mr. Khrushchev had not said, we have to retreat. You read it in there.
That's right.
And he took a lot of flack for that because it's like a poker game where I'm going to raise you, I'm going to raise you, I'm going to raise you, and I'm going to beat you. And it's like dealers, you know, dealing in a poker game or something. And they were really of the mind that Mr. McNamara one time said, I wonder if I'm going to be here next week.
That's right.
They're ready to blow up the world.
That's right.
What kind of,
That's right. I mean, it really was, as you just, it was a high-stakes poker game where they were they were all in.
Yeah.
And Khrushchev folded. And
he did.
There
was somebody else involved in that too. Some Soviet person who was very crucial at that. An individual who had some input.
There was.
I don't know if it was diplomatic or what. I can't remember.
The Soviet ambassador in Washington played.
Dobrynin,
played an important role. There were also a number of side communications through spies, through journalists, through other
you lay that out
methods.
in the description of it.
And one of the things that's so satisfying about Reagan and Gorbachev in Iceland was you had almost a similar dynamic in a positive way, where they started, this was a weekend, it was actually held in a haunted house and on this bluff overlooking the ocean. They started saying, well, you know, let's cut strategic weapons by 50%. They said, okay, that sounds great, let's do that. And they said, well, let's do something about the intermediate range missiles. And they said, okay, yeah, that sounds good too. And they kind of increased the stakes in a positive way. And they sort of got carried away with the moment until at one moment they said, look, let's do away with all nuclear weapons, period.
They almost could get to that,
there was one moment where they said, boy, that sounds great, let's do it.
Except you had the strategic defense initiative.
And then there was the strategic defense initiative that Gorbachev insisted.
That's what he came to the table looking for.
Yes, that's right.
Because they were going to build up that's Star Wars.
That's right. Yes, that's what became known as the Star Wars
and that was something Reagan would not give up. And Reagan was what year was that again?
It was 86, 87.
86. Okay, that was after 82 when he put the weapons, the nuclear-tipped weapons into Europe. And so forth. And 82 was a crucial time.
Yeah.
But so Reykjavik, so we still have them. And are the weapons still species lethal, do you think, or do you ever think about that?
Oh, I think, you know, there was a recent disclosure by the U.S. about how many nuclear weapons we have.
1,500 we're going to go down to?
It was, well...
but there's still a lot of them able to be called up in any time.
Well, that's right. The new START agreement, the new agreement with Russia was about strategic forces, which is a limited proportion of all of our stockpile.
Okay.
There are tactical weapons. There are weapons that aren't deployed but are sitting in warehouses or in reserve.
And nuclear weapon,
So the actual number...
Bunker busters.
Bunker busters. There are all sorts of different types of weapons that aren't strategic. But it's in the thousands, and certainly the Russians have thousands, and other countries not only have weapons but continue building them. So there's no question that there are plenty of weapons out there we could do all sorts of damage to the Earth.
That's an existential question, and it should be made available if that is the case or not. It may be that there be some survivors. If these guys decide, no, we're going to pull all out, and they do it, as they've been doing throughout history. A lot of the heroes are of that nature. You know, it's who wins the poker game, the Cincinnati Kid or something, in the mentality. And you can't do that. You know, Hitler, the Second World War. Is there something new blowing in the wind? Well, heralded by this existential reality that apparently we now can wipe out the entire species? Or is it worth something to think about? And particularly, is there anything different on the positive side, living side, as Fuller would have said, that is making some sort of a peaceful condition? Is the system that's in order calling itself legitimate historically, or do we need something new that the future requires, that our institutions inherited out of history are outdated, and we need a new order that is not there and not being suggested by any of our political leadership, much less even our intellectual leadership, that gives a hint of how and why things are going to change in a fundamental, existentially significant way in this universe? Well, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. And,
okay.
you know,
What's the you think?
Well, Albert Einstein famously said, I don't know what weapons will be fought in World War III, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
I think with all due respect, young man, I don't think there will be any weapons to be picked up by anybody if they can eliminate the entire species. There will be no survivors. Do you think that's possibly true? Every single human being would be wiped out if it's let go, and that those assumptions are still on the table by our so-called leaders? And if so, we need some really heavy-duty negotiation with them by intellectuals, and where the intellectuals are putting a counterforce to that view of realpolitik that still rules.
Well, I think there's still enough weapons to do catastrophic damage.
No doubt.
Of whatever
no,
level.
But that's one thing.
It's something that needs to be
avoided. We did catastrophic damage in Dresden. We had a great. We keep getting stronger and stronger. The point being, it's new that it's species lethal, and it doesn't seem to ever dawn. We used to be concerned with it. They were doing all that in Cuba. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think there is a countervailing force in that part of the good news, of course, is that we are here today to have this conversation.
Well, we're all survivors.
And also, since the Cold War, the number of nuclear stockpiles has been falling fairly considerably. It's still tremendously large, but it's not as large as it has been. And the trend that continues is towards more negotiation and towards smaller stockpiles. So
we may be okay.
Right? You know, the direction is one of certainly less tension with Russia. I mean, the hair
with
trigger.
Russia's fallen, is imploded. 1980.
Well, the Soviet Union.
89. Yeah. Soviet Union imploded.
Yeah, but the idea that we're no longer on hair trigger as we were in the Cold War.
There are those things still on hair trigger alert.
But politically, the tensions aren't as
so
dramatic
we're okay.
as they
were. We passed the test. We're okay. We don't have to worry about it.
We're better than we were before.
Okay.
I'm not saying we're out of the woods. I'm not saying that it's not a changing situation. We need to pay very close attention to what's going on. But it's not as bad as it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, that was very hairy, but I just am of the I'm of the opinion, I think we still need something new on the liberating side for everybody and the ecology that we don't have within the models that we have. I think Greece is in trouble. The whole economic system is roiled. They don't have a system. I think we need that from the intellectuals. You might be a good negotiator with the people who are running things in the old way with new ideas, and you could bring that to the table in terms of a position of leadership, in terms of the expansion of our system. Thank you very much. We've run out of time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Your pleasure to tie the perceptions of a young man, Fredrik Stanton, who's written a very interesting book, greatly recommended, great negotiations, agreements that change the modern world. I still think there's great changes needed.